I will say something on prayer because I think people are interested in it. It's a valid topic. I guess a lot of what I'll say is more descriptions, because the teaching doesn't really talk about prayer as a practice or something useful to peace of mind, but it is something that happens in our life based on a very specific something that's present. And so what I find is that if suffering is present, and suffering essentially means a sense of separation, a sense of seeing oneself as needing things and as the doer. And when we don't feel ourselves as the doer that needs to make life happen, and don't feel that our happiness is to be found in outcomes, then we feel connected to life. We feel like life is living us and flowing through us, so that there is this sense of being lived and connected. So suffering, when we hear that suffering is because of the belief in separation, and peace of mind is the end of separation, in this teaching, it talks about a psychological separation that says, if I believe myself to be the doer and believe myself to need outcomes to be complete, I have this idea of myself that I am an insulated being, uninfluenced by life and making all of the choices and decisions, and I have to get it right, etc. And so there is a sense of being disconnected in that. And it's uncomfortable. And when there's uncomfortableness and a sense of disconnection, that's when I found that prayer is sort of forced out of us, because we feel like God is not us. We feel like God is out there, and that we're alone and disconnected and incapable. And so we need to ask for help. So prayer, to me, is essentially a movement that is forced on us when we feel a certain way. And that way is you really feel like we need help from outside when there is that sense of disconnection and that uncomfortableness. When suffering falls away, the sense is the God that I previously was praying to is actually myself. Not in the sense of an all-powerful God, but there's just this recognition when the suffering and the disconnection falls away. It's like, it's sort of like God inhabits us in that, when we feel like there's nothing to pray for. It's like, because there's no suffering, right? So when there's no suffering, there isn't anything to pray for. And there isn't any God to pray to, because we don't feel separate and disconnected. And so at that point, if there is prayer, it's a prayer of gratitude, not a prayer of asking for something. And so that's the different forms of prayer. Ramesh was a little harsher as far as answering prayer. He said, really, when you look at it, when you're praying, you're begging God for something. And the way he said it often was sort of a bit like trying to point out that prayer is not actually helping, but rather reinforcing separation, I think, is that was the sense I got. I see it as inevitable, when we feel separate, praying is sort of extracted out of us. And I think it gives a sense of hope, and a sense of well, like there is something that will help us. So I see that prayer definitely changes depending on how we feel. That's probably enough on prayer.